I want to talk about Saudi Arabia's finance minister, Mohammed Al-Jadaan, who spoke at the Qatar Economic Forum this week, discussed some high-level macroeconomic trends for the kingdom. Of course, we had discussed his interview on Socrates, I guess is the pronunciation, a few weeks ago,
Socrates.
Hannah, for your deep dive. Socrates,
Yeah.
thank you. But it's spelled Socrates or Socrates. I'm so bad.
In English.
Anyway, in English, yes. And that was a really cool discussion of his interview and what he was talking about and some of the big picture ideas that he was sharing. And one of the takeaways from that was essentially that he is really a very experienced person at the very highest level of government. And that's definitely a good thing. And the way that he talks about things is in a very mature manner, not just hyping things in all directions. He's really a very sophisticated operator at the very highest level of the government. Anyway, so his comments once again showed that level of nuance and sophistication, and they were about contextualizing Vision 2030 and Saudi Arabia's economic growth, especially the all-out efforts to diversify the economy away from oil, which is measured in a statistic called the non-oil economy or non-oil GDP, of course. The comments started off by contextualizing that pursuit. He phrased it as the need for readiness in the face of economic challenges, emphasizing the risks of depending solely on oil and gas income were not wise. And that is something we know very well, but of course is the backbone of the drive to diversify the economy. He also highlighted Saudi Arabia's successful policy so far to ensuring economic stability while diversifying. And if you read between the lines there, that basically means that the kingdom is diversifying, but it does not happen overnight. And in the meantime, would continue to be an energy production leader to power its diversification efforts. The initiatives of Saudi Arabia's National Transformation Plan, Vision 2030, have boosted Saudi GDP by 15%, with unemployment rates dropping, he said. And then there are two interesting stats he said in his comments as well that I thought were both interesting, and I feel like I haven't heard them. We look at the budget reports and everything, but it's kind of interesting. He said, oil revenues exceeded the 2023 budget expectations despite oil prices dropping by around 20% and production decreasing by 17%. Non-oil revenues, however, at the same time, increased by 37%, which is substantial. Now onto his comments that are worth noting as well. These were picked up by Bloomberg, and Bloomberg sort of ran with them as the story. The speech, as I just kind of noted, was a little longer than that. I'm going to read from the articles so we now have the context of the figures of the economy as well as the positive direction it seems to be taking. So from Bloomberg, Saudi Arabia wants to avoid sending the economy into overdrive as it channels investments with the goal of pivoting the nation away from oil dependency. Al-Jadaan said Tuesday that while his country's massive investments are helping to grow the non-oil economy, the kingdom needs to be careful about, quote, overheating, which could cause inflation to quicken and, quote, leakages. Quote, if you don't allow your economy to catch up with your projects, basically what will happen is you'll import a lot more, Al-Jadaan said at the Qatar Economic Forum. As a result, Saudi Arabia could lack the factories and other capacity needed to support its plans. Quote, so giving it more time is actually wise, he said. It's not actually the funding that is the constraint, he said. It's actually the economic leakage. Faster price growth and overheating of the $1.1 trillion economy would likely result from spending, quote, under the current circumstances of serious inflation, pressures around the world, and serious increases in the cost of funding, he said. So, two things. My point in sharing these comments is that it shows an encouraging direction that the kingdom's economy is being pulled in by Vision 2030. The opposite of this is that the oil economy is driving everything forward, nothing is diversifying, and whenever oil is less of a revenue source for the government, then the non-oil economy is not in place to keep the kingdom going. And two, as I mentioned, the sophistication and maturity of Al-Jadaan and other top officials, decision makers, to manage growth toward a stable end goal. It's not a race, it's a planned mission, it's a journey, it's a patient, executed plan that is about the destination and not getting there as fast as possible. The reason why I think that this is important in general, if you're just taking a step back, we have a lot of listeners who are foreign investors or foreigners or are interested in investing in the kingdom and look at the kingdom's economy as a whole and make a decision on whether or not they want to invest, whether or not they want to move here. If you're looking at this and you're looking at this level of prudence, intelligence at the very top, making decisions, doing things in a very smart way, it's going to help you make a decision toward investing and moving towards Saudi Arabia, because you're going to look at this and say, this is not as risky as it might seem if you read only media that is very critical of what's happening in Saudi Arabia. He also, and I'm just going to sum up with this because I want you to plug in as well, Hannah. He had a pretty good soundbite, I think sums up how at least I feel about this place. He said, quote, people talk about flavor of the month. We will be the flavor of decades. Adding that Saudi Arabia will take every step to help investors in the Middle East. I think that's true. It's interesting to see Saudi Arabia be so chic as an investment destination, and people are talking about it. One of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is because people want this kind of information. But I think it's not just now. It's now and for at least a decade going forward. You do have the World Cup coming in 2034. You have Expo 2030. You have the Asian Winter Games. I mean, like, things are going to keep ramping up here. So for at least the next 10 years, and then I think beyond that, it's going to be an investment destination that is attractive and hot. Not just literally hot, but actually just very trendy.
Yeah, I think it's always great to hear about the plans and listen to decision makers kind of lay them out. And especially when things don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, just listening to their take on it. But can you unpack like economic leakage a little bit? Like, what do you think we're talking about here? Like, what does that word even mean? It's a bit confusing.
It's a little confusing. I think he's referring to the missed opportunity for the economy to develop to support the growth around it. So like they would be relying then more on imports and basically non-investment and non-economic growth that would develop jobs and create a larger GDP locally in Saudi. I think that they would then be relying on foreign, to build, as an example, to build a huge giga project, they'd be relying more on foreign-made suppliers and products versus making them locally so that the supply chain is developed around these projects. I don't know exactly, though. I think that's right. If it isn't, then I'm really sorry, but I think that's what he means.
No, I think that makes sense. So basically not staying within the kingdom and kind of relying more heavily on, as you said, imports instead of relying on the Saudi made, on the developing the capacity and capabilities internally. And so by slowing down, you can slowly kind of do that more and maybe focus on developing capabilities, and you can focus on building the factories and getting them up to, excellence level and things like that, which I think that makes sense.
Yeah, locally made, local content, all that stuff we know, and we've talked about it on the show, is hugely important. So to have that be the goal and be that the consistent goal supporting this growth, I think is smart, and I think also makes sense for their economy to be sustainable. I mean, to develop the non-oil economy quickly, but it's not sustainable, it doesn't help as much as doing it the right way. So I think maybe it's doing it right versus doing it quickly. But would be interested if listeners or viewers have any thoughts or comments on that, let us know. But yeah, I think that's what it means.
I think that's kind of what he said, right? But I think also, there are a lot of things that are changing and evolving, and there are, the constant is we're on track to really develop the economy and to bolster the non-oil economy. But I think that doesn't mean it's going to be one person that's doing it, and you just had a whole bunch of new cabinet appointments and a reshuffling a little bit of some of the different positions. I think that happens because you're looking for the best person. And again, it's about those capabilities. So when you find that there are people that maybe are more equipped or just can do things differently and more effectively, that continues to happen. And it's always kind of exciting to see who can be in the driver's seat of some of these different ministries and different positions. So there were a series of appointments that were announced today. I'll read out a couple of them, but I don't know, it's not an exhaustive list. You had the appointment of Prince Abdulaziz Al Mughran as special advisor to the custodian of the two holy mosques with the rank of minister. And he was assigned to carry out the work of deputy minister of the National Guard. You had the appointments also of Mazen Isteri as an advisor to the General Secretariat of the Council of Ministers, and Engineer Sami Al-Muqim as Vice President of the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority. So these are all minister-level positions. And Abdul Muhsin Al-Khalaf was named Deputy Minister of Finance. And Rabdi bin Fahad Al-Rabdi was appointed as the head of the National Data Management Office. You also had a few people that were relieved of their positions. Abdul Muhsin Tuwajri, for instance, is no longer the Deputy Minister of National Guard, but he's going to be an advisor to the Royal Court with the rank of minister, and so on. Oh, and then the last appointment that I want to mention was that Khalid Al Abdul Karim was appointed Secretary General of the Council of Ministers as well. So, yeah, interesting kind of new appointments within the government.
Yeah, it's interesting when these appointments happen. So like something that people that are from the outside looking in should know about leadership changes in the Saudi government. Usually they don't just happen one by one. They kind of come in waves. They essentially are delivered in royal decrees, royal orders, I think decrees, and they are basically announced all at once. And, you know, sometimes there's big changes to many ministers all at once, and sometimes it's a few of them, but they sort of come in these batches. They don't really go one by one by one. And it's interesting because there are things to sort of look into on this. A lot of times ministers are removed from a position, but then moved to another position that may be in a different field, and or that support the government in a different way, are, you know, an advisor to the royal court, or they are moved to another position that is, one could say maybe less important, another one could say more important, but we sort of get these, and they hit them all at once. And these just came out actually maybe 30 minutes before we recorded this show. So we haven't had a chance. We were talking about this right before recording. We haven't had a chance to really go through each one and see, you know, who they are, where they've been, what they've been doing, and what this means. But I'm glad you mentioned that in this context of talking about the economy and larger GDP and kind of general vision, not just like the vision, but a vision for where Saudi Arabia is going, because these changes are into positions like the Saudi Data AI Authority and things that are actually impactful for the non-oil economy. So yeah, we'll be looking into this into the next couple of days and probably discuss it a little bit more, but these changes just happened, so they're super fresh.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics if they're relevant. Excellent.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's get to the news. What's the news in Arabic?
Al-akhbar.
Al-akhbar. Like, okay, cool. Okay, well, can that be be the word this week? Let's do it.
Sure. Yeah, we didn't do a word last episode.
We didn't, and I just didn't get any better at Arabic at all. I did learn a new Arabic word last week, despite your unwillingness to teach me on air, and it was shusma, which means what is it or what's it called, right? Because I hear my voice saying it all the time, like shusma, what's it called? Like, like trying to help you think of the word. So I'm going to add that to my list.
Literally,
for it, even though you don't deserve it.
Literally, it means what's its name, but yeah, because ism is name, ishismak. Eshisma. But when you say it in conversation, shisma means what's it called? Like you would use it exactly in the place of the question, what's it called in English? Like what's it called? Shisma? I use it a lot in English, but maybe it's because I use it in Arabic.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what's it called is like the phrase, but I just like don't know if I say that, but I'm trying to think of what I say. I'm like, I think I just kind of like delay. Anyway, that's good. Shisma. Okay, and then today's is Akbar.
Akhbar.
Okay, and that means news.
They're very different.
Akhbar.
They're very different. Yeah, because Akbar means bigger.
Because Akbar means great, right? Or bigger. Okay.
Okay. Technically, it means bigger. Al-Akbar means the biggest. But if you put it as like the adjective to something, it's complicated, but it means bigger as a standalone word. Al-akhbar is the news.